Fire Captain Engineering, situation critical.
All available personnel on the double. Spock with me.
There are television shows, and then there are television shows that quietly rewire the culture from the inside out. Star Trek, which first appeared on American screens on September 8, 1966, belongs to a category so rare it barely has a name. It wasn't a blockbuster. It wasn't a prestige drama. It didn't dominate the ratings, dazzle the critics, or even survive its initial network run with anything resembling dignity. By the cold mathematics of 1960s television, it was a modest failure. And yet here we are, nearly 60 years later, still talking about it, still watching it, still arguing about it, still finding things inside it that feel uncomfortably relevant to the world we're living in right now. How does that happen? How does a show with cardboard sets, foam rubber aliens, and a budget that wouldn't cover the catering bill on a modern streaming series become one of the most enduring cultural forces of the 20th century? Part of the answer lies in the vision of its creator, Gene Roddenberry. Part of it lies in a cast that brought something genuine and human to every absurd situation they were placed in. And part of it lies in a long, strange collection of behind-the-scenes decisions, accidents, compromises, and outright accidents that shaped the show in ways nobody planned. These are 20 of those stories. Some of them are funny. Some are genuinely moving. A few are the kind of facts that make you look at something you thought you knew completely and realize you were only seeing the surface. Settle in. We're going back to 1966. Before William Shatner ever set foot on the bridge of the Enterprise, there was another man sitting in that chair. When Gene Roddenberry first pitched Star Trek to NBC and won the green light to produce a pilot, the captain he had in mind was played by Jeffrey Hunter, a well-regarded Hollywood actor who had appeared in major studio films, including the role of Jesus in the 1961 epic King of Kings. Hunter filmed the original pilot episode, titled The Cage, as Captain Christopher Pike, quieter, more introspective, more philosophical than the Kirk we would eventually come to know. Roddenberry liked him. NBC liked him. Then, for reasons that remain somewhat disputed, Hunter chose not to continue. Some accounts suggest his wife discouraged him from returning to television. Others indicate he felt the project lacked the prestige he was looking for. Whatever his reasons, he stepped away. William Shatner stepped in, and the entire gravitational field of the show shifted. The Enterprise became a bolder, louder, more electrically charged place. Jeffrey Hunter died in 1969, just 3 years after the show he walked away from became a phenomenon. Leonard Nimoy's portrayal of Spock is one of the great performances in American television history, cool, restrained, unexpectedly moving beneath all that logical armor. But the version of Spock that Roddenberry originally imagined looked dramatically different from what ended up on screen. Early concept notes described a character with reddish, almost demonic-looking skin, unsettling enough to immediately signal something non-human the moment he walked into a scene. Design sketches played with this idea enthusiastically. Then the production team ran headlong into a very 1966 problem. The majority of American households were still watching television in black and white. Red skin on a monochrome screen would read as dark, nearly black, and the implications of that visual choice in the racially charged atmosphere of the era would have been disastrous. The red was abandoned in favor of a faint yellowish-green tint, subtle enough to suggest alienness without causing chaos. The irony is that when the show aired in full color, the tint was so delicate that most viewers never consciously noticed it at all. It was the pointed ears that did the work, the transporter beam, that shimmering, dissolving effect that allows crew members to be disassembled at the molecular level and reconstructed somewhere else entirely, is one of the most iconic pieces of imaginary technology ever put on television. Physicists have used it as a thought experiment. Scientists have cited it as an inspiration. It has its own cultural vocabulary, its own philosophical implications, its own Wikipedia entry. It was also invented entirely to avoid paying for something more expensive. The original plan called for the crew to travel to planetary surfaces via shuttlecraft, a logistically reasonable approach that would have required building and filming a convincing shuttlecraft landing sequence on a regular basis. The cost was prohibitive. The production team needed a cheaper solution, and what they came up with was brilliant in its simplicity. Film glittering particles falling in front of a dark background, reverse the footage, and call it teleportation. The cost was negligible. The effect became iconic. And an idea born from pure financial desperation went on to inspire decades of genuine scientific speculation about whether something like it could ever actually work. When NBC received the first Star Trek pilot in 1965, their verdict was not gentle. The episode was rejected as too cerebral. The executives found it slow, insufficiently action-driven, and philosophically dense for a mainstream audience. There was also particular resistance to the idea of a female first officer, the character called Number One, played by Majel Barrett. Whether the objection was purely about pacing or whether it reflected the era's discomfort with women in command roles, the result was the same: the pilot was scrapped. What happened next was almost unprecedented in network television. Rather than abandoning the project altogether, NBC commissioned a second pilot, a genuine second chance, something almost unheard of. Roddenberry rebuilt the show around a more kinetic structure and introduced the crew we now recognize. But he didn't waste a single frame of the cage. The original pilot was later repurposed into a two-part episode called The Menagerie, which became the only Star Trek episode ever to win a Hugo Award. The rejected pilot became award-winning television. Sometimes failure is just a detour to be why the end of the first season, Nichelle Nichols had made history without necessarily being treated like it. As Lieutenant Uhura, she occupied a position on screen that was genuinely radical for 1966 American television. A black woman in a role of authority, competence, and dignity, treated as an equal by her colleagues in a future where such equality was simply assumed. And yet she was considering leaving. Broadway was calling, and the opportunities there felt more substantial. She submitted her resignation to Roddenberry and went to an NAACP fundraising event, where she was told that someone wanted to meet her. That someone was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King told her directly that Uhura was not merely a character, she was a symbol, one of the first images of a black woman in a position of genuine professional authority that young black children in America could see on a mainstream network. She withdrew her resignation the following day. The future of representation in science fiction turned on one conversation at a fundraising event. Today it feels almost impossible to imagine Leonard Nimoy being uncertain about Spock. The two are so completely fused in the cultural imagination that separating them feels like a category error. But in the early stages of production, Nimoy had serious reservations. His primary concern was that the alien makeup, particularly the pointed ears and the slightly greenish complexion, would make Spock look monstrous rather than sympathetic, reducing a potentially complex character to a novelty act. He also wrestled with the emotional demands of the role, or rather the anti-emotional demands. Nimoy was a trained actor who had spent years learning to access and express feeling. Playing a being whose entire philosophy was built around the suppression of emotion required him to work against everything his training had given him. What turned it around was the audience. Viewers connected with Spock in ways nobody had quite predicted. They found warmth in the restraint, depth in the silence. Nimoy later published two memoirs. The first was titled I Am Not Spock. The second was titled I Am Spock. The distance between those two titles is the arc of an entire career. That on November 22, 1968, the episode Plato's Stepchildren aired, featuring a kiss between Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura that has been widely cited as one of the earliest interracial kisses in American primetime television history. Getting that moment to air was not straightforward. NBC's concern was not morality exactly, it was business. Southern television affiliates were a significant part of the network's reach, and executives worried about backlash. The solution they proposed was to frame the kiss as involuntary, forced upon both characters by the telekinetic powers of alien villains. That way, the argument went, nobody could claim it was a genuine expression of something. William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols had other ideas. During filming, on takes where they were supposed to keep their faces apart, they consistently flubbed the shot, making those takes unusable. The director had no choice but to use footage where they turned toward each other. The kiss aired. The network added its disclaimer. And Nichols later spoke about receiving a letter from a white man in the South who told her the moment had made him genuinely question beliefs he'd held his entire life. Star Trek was never a comfortable ratings success. After the first season, NBC began making noises about cancellation. After the second, the noises became a genuine threat. What followed was something with almost no precedent in television history: organized, large-scale audience resistance. Fans wrote letters, not emails, physical letters, in quantities that flooded NBC's mailrooms. Estimates placed the total correspondence across both campaigns at over 1 million pieces. Petitions circulated on university campuses. Groups of fans physically demonstrated outside the network's offices. All of this in the pre-internet era, coordinated through nothing more sophisticated than mimeographed newsletters and word of mouth. It worked, twice. NBC renewed the show for a third season and made the announcement publicly at a fan convention, one of the earliest instances in television history of an audience visibly and demonstrably reversing a network's business decision. The third season was underfunded and largely creatively diminished, and the show was eventually cancelled in 1969. But those extra episodes were enough to push the series into syndication. And syndication is where the legend actually began. The USS Enterprise model used for filming, an 11-foot construction that became one of the most recognizable spacecraft in all of fiction, had a secret hidden in plain sight, or rather hidden away from it. The model was painstakingly detailed on every surface the cameras were likely to photograph: the saucer section, the nacelles, the visible hull plating. The craftsmanship on those surfaces was genuinely impressive for a television production working on constrained resources. The underside of the model, however, was a different story. Because every shot was composed from above or from the side, the underside would never be seen. So it was left largely unfinished, rough, unpainted in places, stripped of the detailing that covered every other surface. The original model now lives in the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. If you could somehow turn it over, you would find the unglamorous reality beneath one of the most celebrated fictional vehicles ever built. Filmmaking is, in the end, always partly illusion. Beam me up, Scotty. It has been on bumper stickers and coffee mugs for 5 decades. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station said it when James Doohan, the actor who played Montgomery Scott, passed away. It is perhaps the single most quoted line in the entire history of the franchise. It also does not exist. Nowhere in the original series, not in any episode, not in any form, does Captain Kirk say the precise words "Beam me up, Scotty." What he says, in various episodes, includes "Scotty, beam me up," "beam us up," and "Enterprise, beam me up." Close approximations, circling the phrase from all directions. But the exact combination that became the cultural touchstone? Never uttered. This is not unique to Star Trek. Play It Again, Sam appears nowhere in Casablanca, and Elementary, My Dear Watson, is absent from Arthur Conan Doyle's original stories. But the Star Trek case is striking because the invented quote achieved a level of fame that no actual line from the show ever matched. Sometimes the story we tell about something becomes more real than the thing itself.